Welcome to Clotheshorse, the podcast that actually doesn't own any Buffalo Plaid clothing. I'm your host, Amanda. This episode is part one of a two-part conversation with KT and Maggie, the two sisters and best friends behind fully sustainable hat brand Salt Hats. We met through the magic of Instagram, and when I saw that KT and Maggie had started their own clothing line in high school, which they sold via a zine/catalog, I knew I wanted to have them on the show. It ended up becoming almost 3 hours of conversation. Basically, what was originally intended as a conversation picking apart the signs that a brand is fast fashion, well, it turned into so much more. So yes, we will be discussing that a bit in this episode, but most of that topic will happen in the next episode. Today, we'll hear about how and why KT and Maggie started their own brand as teens, and how and why they started a fully sustainable hat line as adults. And they will share a history lesson about Paisley and Buffalo Plaid. And then I'll share a little bit about the development of fast fashion. So basically, this might be the most educational episode of Clotheshorse yet. Before we jump into the episode, and I'm warning you, this is a long one, I wanted to talk about something ripped from the headlines: COVID-19 and its impact on retail workers, specifically the safety issues retail workers are experiencing in the wake of the pandemic. A few days ago, I learned that nearly 20,000 Amazon and Whole Foods employees have tested positive for the coronavirus. And Reddit, social media, even my Instagram DMs have been full of stories of grocery store chains, clothing stores, and major retailers that are experiencing sort of these like top secret surges in COVID cases. A recurring theme is that employees are not allowed to tell other employees about their status. Of course, it somehow always comes out, right? Fueling even more distrust and anxiety for the team. The New York Times featured a story, I want to say it was like last week, about how terribly REI, who I generally think of as a pretty decent company, basically REI was handling positive cases by silencing employees, among other things. Employers defend these workplace gag rules by saying they protect healthcare privacy, which I get, kinda, but it seems like it's more about preventing the news from getting to customers than protecting the workers. And like I said, it's pretty widespread. Workers from major players like McDonald's, Amazon, and Target have come forward to say that they were also forbidden from sharing their status with coworkers. At a CVS in Georgia, after a pharmacy employee came down with COVID-19, the district leader instructed employees to not tell patients that their medications had been filled by someone who tested positive for the virus. So they were looking at multiple issues, right? Also we're looking at endangering the customers. Are you familiar with OSHA? It's the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. They basically keep our workplaces safe, and technically you can file a claim with them when you feel as if your workplace is unsafe. And supposedly you can do that in the era of COVID, but it's kind of complicated. It would seem like precautions protecting COVID would fall under their jurisdiction, right? Because they're defining all of the other workplace safety policies. Well, it's yes and no. Basically, OSHA has been falling short in terms of creating protocols to protect workers from COVID. In fact, on September 14th, the New York Times editorial board said that such emergency rules could have prevented, quote, many needless deaths in warehouses, grocery stores, and meatpacking plants. Meanwhile, OSHA is saying, well, number one, employers can tell you to keep your COVID status a secret from your coworkers. And number two, employers should, basically on the honor system, work with their state and local authorities to develop protocols for contact tracing. And for everything else, as in the best practices to keep the workers safe while they're actually at work, they should just sort of establish some best practices to protect the workers, on their own. Because there's no concrete rules around it. Just hey, do your best, all right? This is the honor system. I'm sure you'll nail this. And listen, as a customer, the store has done so much to protect you. But the employees, well, it kind of varies. For example, even if a company has a rule that only one person can use a break room at a time, which is pretty standard right now, If one person leaves and another person enters immediately, chances are that the previous occupant's aerosol, which is potentially infected, is still in the air. And there have been a lot of complaints about lack of cleaning protocols in employee restrooms, which toilet flushing is a really easy way to transmit COVID-19. And yes, customers are technically required to wear masks in stores in most parts of the country, but retailers are doing very little to enforce that because they don't want to lose their customers. And this is something I'm hearing from a lot of you listeners who work in retail. Employees are generally allowed to ask nicely one time, and then they have to let it go. On my recent trip to Target, I saw half a dozen people without masks, and most of them, this was just blowing my mind, were just walking around talking on their phones like it was a totally normal time in the world. My daughter works at Rite Aid, and she's regularly receiving death threats and other terrible threats when she asks a customer to wear a mask. And once again, there's nothing she can do. I cannot say this enough. Wear a mask. Seriously, if you refuse to wear a mask in a store, please stop listening to the podcast right now. If you have health issues that prevent you from wearing one, then please get someone else to do your shopping. This is about protecting everyone around you and yourself. And no matter what our president says, COVID is a really big deal. I had it this year. I was sick for months. It turned into crazy inflammation in my joints. There were times where I thought I was going to die because my heart was racing. I was in so much pain. I had a lot of neurological issues. It's no joke, okay? So anyway, let's say you do get sick. Why not just sue the employer or store that, you are pretty sure got you sick? Well, like everything we talk about here on the pod, it's complicated. Both shoppers and employees have very little legal recourse in terms of coronavirus-related negligence cases. It's pretty much impossible to prove that you 100% without a doubt got COVID from one particular place if you go multiple places in a given period. So the burden of proof is challenging, even if it seems fairly solid from like a circumstantial evidence standpoint. You want to hear something crazy? The Sacramento Bee reported that local businesses have begun private investigations to prove that sick employees actually contracted the virus outside of work instead of at work because California passed a law classifying COVID-19 as a workers' compensation injury, which is rad. But of course, businesses don't want to pay. They don't want to cover the paid time off and the treatment for it. California law puts the burden of proof that a frontline worker didn't contract COVID-19 on the employers rather than on the worker. So once again, it allows affected employees more access to workers' compensation. And that gets expensive when we're talking about treatment, paid time off. Some of these illnesses can go on for a really long time. We've heard all about these long haulers. Employers don't want to pay for their employees to get months of treatment, maybe need physical therapy, respiratory therapy, all kinds of things, right? I'm not saying that's okay, but that's why they're trying so hard to get out of it. Furthermore, more and more retailers have been asking workers, especially those that have been furloughed and are now coming back to work, to sign arbitration agreements in order to start working again. Basically, the options are sign the agreement and have a job, or don't sign it and now also be ineligible for unemployment insurance because that's considered a voluntary resignation. I read the saddest article about 60-year-old women being forced to sign these in order to come back to work at the Container Store. And some of them were like, okay, well, I desperately need this money, but myself or my husband are at risk of, complications from the virus. So I just don't know what to do. It's like pay my rent and risk my life or stay home and soon be homeless. This is the world we're living in right now. I always had a weird feeling about the Container Store, and now I know I was right. Don't go to the Container Store. So what's the big deal about this? I mean, beyond 60-year-old women being forced to choose between their health or their home. Well, when workers sign arbitration agreements, they agree not to take common workplace claims like wage theft or discrimination to court. Instead, they have to go before an arbitrator, which for the employer tends to hold certain advantages. Many of these agreements, including the Container Stores, prevents workers from joining in class action lawsuits, which reduces the collective power they could wield if they banded together. And like, for example, one thing you could sue about on a class action suit as a group of employees would be your company not putting the right precautions in place to protect you from COVID-19 and some of you getting sick or dying. So they couldn't sue the company for any COVID-related health issues. Meanwhile, Republicans are pushing for legislation that would protect all employers from liability related to workplace-related COVID infections. That's a really scary thing. Now, this is a great time for employers to have the upper hand. There are very few jobs and many, many unemployed people. It's easy to strong arm an employee into taking a pay cut, less hours, taking on more responsibility with no compensation, or in this case, signing away their legal rights. So employees are more vulnerable than ever. It's sort of like a perfect storm here because we're looking at employees being very vulnerable because they need any job they can get right now, right? And so employers have such an upper hand that they don't have to protect the employees from coronavirus. Like, they don't have to put in any sort of policies and protections because, one, they may be released from liability here, and two, OSHA is not putting any rules in place that they must follow. A recurring theme on this podcast is that retailers and brands answer to only two things: the law and sales numbers. They aren't going to protect workers because it's the right thing to do. They need legal pressure to protect their workers. Like, OSHA needs to step in and be like, these are the rules. If you don't follow them, we're going to fine the hell out of you. Or I should say, employees can sue the shit out of you, right? There has to be something there. Unfortunately, there are no numbers available for the number of retail workers that have contracted COVID-19 because, this is all being kept under such wraps. But you can assume that there are many sick workers out there. We know that there are a lot of retail workers in the United States, and there have been more than 7 million total cases in the U.S. If you do the math there, we're looking at a lot of retail workers infected. We will only know how bad it is for employees if they are able to speak up about it. And unfortunately, the fear of losing their jobs will prevent that from happening. So what can you do? Well, ask retailers about the protections they have in place for workers. Social media is a great outlet for that. Wear a damn mask when you go shopping. Seriously, guys, wear a mask and over your nose. Lots of stuff comes out of your nose too. Encourage others to wear a mask. I think there's something to say about like peer/societal pressure when we are looking at something like mask wearing. I think about it a lot in Portland where like if you littered, you'd probably be chased out of town. And so you don't see a lot of litter. That's an example to me that I think about all the time. Wash your hands before you go shopping. Once again, this is about protecting everyone else in the store, not just yourself. And then I would say wash your hands when you leave or use a hand sanitizer. We've literally got a huge bottle of hand sanitizer in our car that we use after every stop on a day of errands. And don't be an asshole when you go shopping, ever, really, but now more than ever. Treat their workers with respect because they are putting their lives on the line every day so that you can buy some dry shampoo and kombucha. And they're all making something in the neighborhood of minimum wage. Okay, let's get into the episode. I promise it'll be a lot more fun than this conversation. Today we have two Clotheshorse firsts, which is one, two guests at the same time, which has not happened before. And two, these two guests are sisters. So it's a big day. It's a big day in Clotheshorse history. Do you two want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. Well, I'm Katie. This is Maggie. So you want to say hi? You won't be able to tell us apart, so it doesn't matter that much anyway.
But you're not twins, right?
No, we're not twins. We're 2 years apart.
This isn't like we also have twins today, because that would be too much.
No, you wouldn't be able to handle that. No. No, we're 2 years apart. We grew up as best friends, and we kind of just like followed each other around our whole lives. So, and we have a younger sister as well. She'll be mad if we don't acknowledge it. So we're the oldest 2 of 3 sisters, but we're not twins. Okay. We are from a small town that's in Michigan. It's a village, actually, and that our family goes pretty far back there, but we have lived in Detroit for almost 2 decades now. We both own houses in Southwest Detroit. We moved here for school. We both went to art school. I dropped out. Maggie, I
graduated. Not that it made a difference.
No. Yeah, I was going to say, do you feel as though it has made a difference?
No, I feel not in the slightest. Like we both, it didn't matter either way, really. We basically grew up with 2 parents that taught us what we essentially call a scavenging lifestyle. Our mom taught us how to thrift and garage sale. It was kind of like a curse if we paid full price for anything in our family. Mm-hmm. Our dad worked at a local university. I won't say their name, but big university in Michigan. He was a carpenter there for his entire adult life. And he actually built our house from blueprints that he made in high school. And he used scavenged materials from the universities that they were throwing out in the garbage.
Well, and just weird random things, like they found an iron spiral staircase in a swamp.
What?
Yeah. We grew up kind of like in the middle of swamps, and they found a piece of property he actually just sold. He found a spiral staircase and put it in the house.
Wow. Yeah, I'm impressed. I'm worried that Dustin's going to hear this episode and now start hanging out in some swamps.
There's probably There's probably lots of good stuff. But actually, the swamp directly behind our house, our neighbors put like buses in it, cars.
Yeah, weird stuff.
All sorts of stuff.
They also, the trim in the house is made from like the oak trees that were, they had to take down to build the house. So that was kind of
that's cool.
And it kind of speaks to what we both do with all of our work through our entire life. We kind of had that built in from our very beginning. But I spent a good 15 years in fast fashion. I worked 11 years at H&M. Basically, I started as a sales advisor and worked my way through visual merchandising up to store manager, and ended up leaving that to manage the oldest hat retailer in the United States. Like big time switch from fast fashion and opening stores across the country for this big, fast fashion giant to working at a store that has 9 employees and probably only needs like 5 or 6. Mm-hmm. Very special. You want to go ahead with you, Megs?
Well, I started sewing when I was like a really, really young kid, like 5 or 6. I don't even really remember. That's always kind of informed my whole story, I guess. But when I was like 12 or 13, we started our line of like
upcycled vintage textiles, basically.
Yes,
at the age of like 13.
Yeah, what year was this? Because this is like very advanced.
It was probably 97, 96?
No, 99, 2000.
I mean, this is pretty cutting edge.
Mystery.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pre-internet, basically, like pre pre-Etsy,
Yeah, we had like dial-up internet and like no understanding of how to sell something on the internet.
Really no idea how to sell anything. Yeah, like we didn't know how to sell anything or buy anything. We basically got started because of zine culture. Yeah, we were Riot Girls. We were members of Riot Girl Michigan.
Yeah,
and we got heavily into zines. I made quite a few zines through my life, which I will not say the name of because I don't, wish to revisit that writing. But very embarrassing. I was really into personal zines, but we were, interested in Riot Girl and kind of like the political aspects of that. So what we kind of came up with was from our obsession with Delias. We kind of grew out of that into like a zine version of Delias. Yeah. So our brand was called Former Child Stars. Mm-hmm. For some reason, we always have a penchant for long names. And it was basically a cut and paste zine where we shot the photos on film on a point and shoot camera, cut them out pasted them on top of, they were illustrations from a technical scuba book that I had. You know, like everyone loved all those 50s illustrations, 50s illustrations.
Still do.
Yeah, I mean, they're great. And we pasted the photos on top of those and then typed up all the information on our typewriter. And Maggie, you want to explain what we actually made?
Well, I can't recall everything, but the first thing that comes to mind are the underwear, t-shirt underwear
from vintage t-shirts and also just vintage fabric,
like weird
trimmings.
Random fabric. Like when I was that age, for some reason, well, still, people would always be like, "Oh, you sew? Here, do you want this like weird box of vintage fabric that's been in my garage for 100 years?" And so that's like kind of how I started sewing, was that people would give me like these weird vintage textiles. And then I was given like a weird vintage sewing machine, and I got vintage sewing books from the library. So that was like, it was just never going to be anything else. It was always going to be vintage, upcycled, anything. Repurposed. Yeah. We were just talking about, I can't even imagine what would have been in a fabric store then.
Yeah, at the time, you know, in the like late 90s, early 2000s, Joann Fabrics would have been, I think, just all old lady prints.
Oh, for sure. And maybe some kids ones that are like licensed.
Yeah. And like maybe like sports or something. I don't even know. I actually, my first job was at Joann Fabrics, and I know that I had no interest in buying anything there. I just, we would steal candy all the time. That's it.
I mean, now Joann is like 80% that weird fleece that like people make the weird tie blankets from. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it's like aisle after aisle of printed fleece, and it's just like you can't buy fabric there. Period.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's anything else. Like, I mean, the fleece aside, everything is synthetic.
Yeah. And expensive for what it is. It's like Joann is fast fashion of fabric.
Yeah, and they do all the 50% off coupons and all that stuff. So.
I think I just like blew my own mind. I'm like, oh my God, it's all the evidence is there. We're going to talk about what makes fast fashion today, like the symptoms. And now that I'm going through it in my mind, I'm like, oh yeah, Joann checks all the boxes.
Oh yeah,
and Michael's too.
Oh yeah, all of those. That whole like, you go to the strip mall to buy your craft supplies kind of store. I mean, it serves its purpose, I suppose, but it's more so, you know, hobbyists who want fleece blankets that you tie together. Yeah. So, you know, the only fabric that we had that would have fulfilled our needs at the time would have been vintage textiles from, you know, all of our, so many friends and family. Even when our grandma passed away recently, or recent years, we inherited all of her weird fabric. Maggie made masks out of a lot of it.
Cool.
But we also, you know, you've talked about it with other people before, came up in the golden age of thrift, where in those late 90s, we had a Salvation Army that we would go to, and it looked like you entered the 70s when you walked into the store. It was an old, I think we were thinking carpet store that, you know, you walked in, every single thing was from like the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. It was like every dream piece that you ever wanted, and half of it we hated at the time. The other half we bought, and you know, what couldn't be worn as in its actual state was cut up and made into something else. We did a lot of silk screening too. We have some regrets.
Yeah. Don't silk screen on vintage stuff. It's not cool.
That was a thing though.
Oh, yeah.
Like I remember that. And that like late 90s, early aughts, where people were just starting to begin this idea of like upcycling. It was always bad screen printing on really beautiful vintage clothes. It makes me so sad.
For the most part, though, I think like it was a good time to be experimental because there wasn't the internet, so you weren't influenced by, you know, so much.
Yeah.
And so, and a love of vintage kind of, I think inspired a lot of people who were hand making clothing at the time.
Definitely. Did you actually have customers for your catalog?
Yeah. So one of the biggest things that we did was, I think for that line, we did the first, it was the Chicago Urban Craft Fair, I believe.
Yeah.
Oh, the Renegade Craft Fair.
Yeah.
It was the Renegade.
Oh, yeah. Oh my God. That takes me back.
Oh yeah. So that was probably like, I want to say 2001, 2002-ish. We sold more there. It was kind of like a weird thing with the zine as kids. Like zines went through distros, which distros would then print like a catalog, if you remember those.
Yeah. Oh,
Like a
yeah,
Xerox
definitely. You would have to
catalog.
you'd send away like a couple bucks or like a self-addressed stamped envelope, and you would get the distro catalog back.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah.
And eventually, I think
Pre-internet.
I don't think we got any mail orders.
yeah, I think it was more so like handing it out kind of thing. We put it around. So where we grew up was definitely the country and not the suburbs. And so we would drive to towns that were good, like 30 miles away to leave our catalogs places. We weren't thinking about making money. We just thought it was cool because we had such we wanted to make clothing, and we had loved Delia so much. So it was kind of like our growing out of that into something different, like what we thought was like DIY, like punk, rag girl,
Yeah.
And so it was more so like to friends and people in the area kind of thing. And then at that craft fair.
And how long did you do it?
We really only did that for a couple years, like I guess it was a pretty long time, actually. It would have been maybe 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
So we did that for a while.
Wow.
And it was kind of also, we were just making things under an umbrella almost. We would work with our friends on projects. We would make all sorts of stuff. We did a lot of silk screening. We took, we were the kids who, by the time we graduated high school, didn't have any more academic classes on our schedule. It was all art classes and the school newspaper. And right after I graduated, I went to art school. Maggie would, come out to Detroit to visit, and we ended up starting a different clothing line, which had another long name. It was called Heavy Metal Boyfriend. And we did that, I think, longer than we did the first one.
Oh, a lot longer.
I mean, we essentially never officially gave it up, so maybe we're still doing it. I don't know.
So, like, what was the difference with this new brand?
It was it was the same concept, so it was all upcycled, but we had gotten really we had moved out of like the punk aesthetic into like rock and roll. So we were super into like 70s rock and roll and recreating that type of fashion. But like, if you remember in 2005-ish it was like specific, it's still going, but it's a specific kind of almost like metalhead look. And so we were doing a lot of leather. We made leather witch hats. We did leather vests. Still did a ton of silkscreen t-shirts, but it was like in the past 20 years, the first time that tie-dye had come back as like a huge trend in some circles.
I'm remembering this time. It's actually, I felt like that era, there were so many like really hot dudes all over the place.
Oh yeah, everyone had long hair,
it was a peak time for hot dudes.
Tight pants and boots and all that kind of stuff. I mean, we really haven't grown out of it, so I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm wearing like a Repro biker t-shirt right now, so we haven't really gotten out of it, but that was kind of like the gist of our next clothing line that we did for a long time. And I mean, there were a lot of people that did essentially the same thing. They were just a lot more successful.
Yeah.
Like we just really liked doing it. We did like some fashion shows, like local fashion shows. We did a lot of stuff on the internet, and we still have some of the pieces. We sell them at this really cool flea market that we do with our friends. I feel like that was more so just our lifestyle at the time. Like we were making things that either we wanted to see people wear, or we were making things that we just wanted to see. We rarely wear our own clothing. We wear the t-shirts, but we've never gotten past the idea that people have where they just want to see something made, and so they make it. We've never been great at marketing or in our fashion lives. We were excellent at all that stuff, but in our slow fashion lives, it was actually just a thing we wanted to do.
Right. So what are the two of you working on now?
Currently, we have started a hat line they're truly sustainable hats. They're vintage hats that couldn't be restored to their original state. We take them and turn them into blanks, reblock them into a new shape, and then we do a lot of dyeing and embroidery on the hats. And so I am the store manager at a place called Henry the Hatter. It's a 127-year-old hat business. It's the oldest in America. And so when I started to work there, I have two bosses who are, they just know everything. They know everything about hats. They know everything about the history and how they're, the historical, like people who've worn them. They've sold hats to, I mean, Hank too calls us to order hats. So
wow,
yeah,
that's
so
amazing.
they know like the specs, they'll call Stetson with the specs. They can kind of design these hats through companies. And I've learned a lot from them. So my direct boss, my general manager, has been teaching me how to do all the hat repairs. So I've spent the past few years learning hat repairs, leather replacement, how to reblock a hat, which is to put the shape back into the hat, how to clean them. And so we're one of the only places in the United States that does pretty much what I'd call a full service hat repair. And just from learning all of those processes, I started making my own hats. And as I'd wear them at work, people would ask, oh, where's that one? Where's that on the shelf? And so we just kind of started it as a fun thing, and it's taking off a lot more than we anticipated. So that's Salt Hats is the name of the hat company. It's at Salt Hats on Instagram.
Thank you for doing that, because I was going to make you say it.
I finally remembered how to market something.
Yeah, no, and these hats are super fucking cool. Like, they're amazing, and everyone should see them. They're way cooler than any of the other hats out there right now.
Thank you. One thing that we really were interested in doing, like if we were going to make start another sort of repurposed brand, we were going to go full bore. So I do use a lot of fur felt, and while I'm not necessarily in any way in support of the fur industry, there are so many hats in this world. I don't think people understand how many beautiful felts there are. That, I mean, we have customers come into work and they don't want the hat anymore. They'll throw it in the garbage. And the whole point of buying a nice hat is that it can last you decades as long as you keep it up.
Yeah.
And so, I just can't see that happen anymore. All these felts can be completely reworked. For our leather bands, we use repurposed leather it's like scraps from the auto industry.
Wow.
We're in Detroit. And when the auto industry has these hides, some of the hides will have imperfections. So, they're going to make a seat out of this hide, but it has like the tiniest hole, or the dye wasn't even in one spot. And so they throw them away.
God.
And luckily we actually have a few brands in Detroit, in the city, that are using a lot of that leather. It feels like an unending amount of it in different colors. And so we use that as our hat bands. Every single thing that we use is either vintage or repurposed. So even the leathers that I would remove from a hat to make it into essentially a blank piece of felt. When I remove any of those pieces, I save the trimming and I repurpose it in some way. So I use the leather as trim on the outside of the hat.
So I do the embroidery on hats, and everything that I use, I generally find, vintage at the thrift store or something. I don't buy new wool or new embroidery floss. So all of that would have ended up in a landfill too.
For sure.
So that's been, pretty important to me to do that part.
Yeah, it's really overwhelming to think about how there are places like Joann's and Michael's where you can go buy these things new. And sometimes, you do need some new thread or you need some needles, but there are so many trims and notions that just go to the thrift store or go right into the garbage. To even estate sales, things like that.
I mean, it's crazy because a lot of the thrift stores have like an entire aisle of this stuff at this point. Like, if you get into scrapbooking, especially, there is I'm so much scrapbooking bullshit, but tons and tons of yarn and fabric, and always bags of embroidery floss. Like, that's the first place you should look for these kinds of things, for sure.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Especially because you can find a lot of really great quality notions, like things that that are vintage generally were made better. And so it's going to be a lot better than the garbage you'd buy at a cheap craft store.
Yeah, totally. With your coupon.
Yeah, with your 50% off coupon.
Yeah.
The whole point of what we're trying to do is to really just be as sustainable as possible, especially because I don't want to dog the hat industry because I work in it. It is actually slow fashion, and a lot of the practices are There's a lot of made in America companies or made in ethical factory hats that you can buy. And a lot of the practices are actually pretty sustainable in terms of what they're doing in the context of making a hat. But ultimately, for me personally, what I would like to do is repurpose the ridiculous amount of stuff that we have on this earth,
Yeah. Agreed. It's like, even people who have like the best intentions often don't see that, like that whole picture, So like, yeah, I'm sure that all the people who are making the hats here are making a lot more money than they would overseas, but like, then all the stuff is going in the trash. So
yeah, that and also, there is fur involved and there is leather involved. And so that's a whole nother episode, but
Right. No, I agree. I mean, I learned like a year or two ago that a lot of like nice hats are made of fur, and it blew my mind. And I think it's probably going to blow the minds of a lot of listeners, because when you look at them, you can't tell they're fur.
Right.
And then when you know that that's what they are and get up close, you're like, oh, I see it now. Right.
Yeah.
That was mind blowing for me, because I also, I worked in the world of fast fashion, where all of our hats, when hats were a trend, were felt, and like shitty felt at that.
Yeah, or like a lot of them actually are poly, so they're plastic hats.
Yeah.
Like
good point. Good point. Yes, you're right.
It's very rare that you're going to find a quality hat that is made from wool, and there's really only, I would say, a handful of brands that make quality wool hats. So if you buy a new hat and you don't want to support the fur industry, there's, you want to research into what would be a quality hat, because if you want something that's going to last, ultimately a fur felt hat lasts a lot longer.
It's true.
We have hats that come in from the 40s, the 30s, that people have been passed down in families, and people are getting them cleaned and reworked, and they're so easy to work on. It's kind of mind-blowing that of all the industries, the hat industry is one that's overlooked as like, it's actually a pretty sustainable industry, making really quality products if you go to the right place. But all the fast fashion retailers, you want to talk about fit and quality, fast fashion, you cannot find a quality hat. Like, stop buying garbage hats. Don't buy any more Forever 21 plastic hats.
Right. I mean, well, they're going to last you like a couple months at best. They're going to lose their shape. They're going to get really weird and pilly. God forbid you get them wet. They may bleed onto your face if you get caught in the rain.
And then they change to the weirdest shapes. I mean, if you look at how they wear, people, I see a lot of different quality of hats at my work. And when you see a quality hat that's 40 years old, that's held its shape, that just, still looks beautiful, the lines are timeless, and then people will bring in these hats. It's kind of like this, I feel like it's a more recent phenomenon, but we seem to be getting a lot of hats from Amazon. And
really?
Yeah. So if you go on Amazon, I mean, you can scroll through pages of hats that are like $9 to $14. And I mean, no one should be putting that on their head. Your head is, your skin is very absorbent on your face. You don't want whatever material that is.
That's a very valid point.
Yeah. And but hats are a very personal thing. It's almost like, you can borrow your friend's clothing because they can wash it. You're not really putting on someone else's hat very often because it has their smell. It has their oils in it. It's like wearing someone's shoes. And so your body gets real up close and personal. You don't want to be wearing like gross plastics in your underwear. You don't want to be wearing gross plastics on your head or on your feet.
Yeah.
Hats have been kind of like the design is in straw and in felt has been kind of perfected over thousands of years, to the point where we don't need to mess with it. We don't need any new materials. Let's stick with what works.
So today we're going to talk about something that it seems like we talk about all the time on this podcast, which is fast fashion. But one thing we haven't really done on Clotheshorse before is talk about like what really is fast fashion. Because I think we all have an idea that like, yeah, well, it's Zara and it's Forever 21, but it's so much more complicated than that. So I thought I would start with some history of how we came to the point where we are now. And I know that the two of you have some history to share with us too. So I'm excited because I don't know what it is, but I'm excited to hear it. I'm in suspense too. So clothes shopping used to be an occasional thing, like something you might do for a special occasion, like a big party or prom. I remember as a kid, like back to school shopping, it was like one day only. And like you had to get everything you were going to get for school. And that was it. There were no new clothes again until maybe Christmas. It's kind of like the inverse would happen with summer clothes. It's not something we would do every week or even every day. But this changed about 20 years ago. So like 2000. When trends suddenly like really sped up and each one had a shorter and shorter life cycle. And you can kind of look back on time and sort of see that like the 70s had a really definitive style. The 80s had a really definitive style. Even the 90s did. But when you get into the aughts, like if you were going to make a list of all the trends that happened, it would be pages and pages. It would be like juicy tracksuits and pulling up your thong too far and graphic tees and Von Dutch hats. And I mean, I could like go on and on. I know some of those were all the same person wearing them, but it's just where my mind went. So at the same time, clothes became cheaper and shopping became a hobby. Like literally, I would see people on OkCupid listing like shopping as one of their interests or hobbies, which is so gross in retrospect. But at the time, I'd be like, oh, me too. I like, or whatever you did on OkCupid when you liked someone. I can't remember. Yeah. So before the 1800s, fashion was about as slow as you can get it. Like, not only would you have to make your own clothes, you would also have to create the materials that they were made of, from thread to fabric to leather to yarn, everything. And the first sewing machine was invented in 1790 by an English inventor named Thomas Saint. But it turned out that he was really bad at advertising and marketing, so it didn't really catch on. I'm sure he was mad about this for a really long time because, I mean, I guess people didn't live to be that old back then, but in 1846, so like, what was that, 56 years later, a guy named Elias Howe patented the first sewing machine, and it really took off. But it's important noting that in America, a little bit earlier, Walter Hunt came up with a backstitching sewing machine in the early 1830s, but he was so afraid that it would result in the massive unemployment of seamstresses, he declined to patent it. He was like, this is going to be too bad for society. So in a weird way, he was kind of like a hero. He also invented the safety pin. So this guy, Walter Hunt, is really great, really actually. He's done a lot for humanity, So anyway, the sewing machine, it made clothes easier and quicker to make. I mean, imagine hand sewing a whole dress. People used to do that. So dressmaking shops popped up all over the place, and they would offer reasonably priced and accessible clothing to middle-class people. This is actually when sweatshops began to pop up because these dressmakers tended to employ a bunch of sewers. They all worked in one room in the back of the shop. There might not be any windows. There might not be any ventilation. Everybody was sewing nonstop. By the 60s and 70s, young people began to sort of create and support new fashion trends. And that's because it was the first time teenagers had disposable income. Prior to the 60s, most teens with after-school jobs had to actually give their money that they made, their wages, to the household. But now they could keep it. So they shopped like all the time. They bought clothes, records, comics, ice cream sundaes probably. And the advertising industry began to realize that this demographic was and still is a cash cow. So the fashion industry sort of split into two major lanes at this time. And one was like the high fashion. So that's like the expensive luxury, the sort of brands that show at New York Fashion Week. And then the high street, which is the more mass, more affordable stuff. But even still, like the cheaper stuff wasn't that cheap. People weren't buying new clothes every week, probably not even every month. I mean, I definitely knew some girls in middle school whose parents would buy them like anything they wanted anytime, and they could go to Fashion Bug and get like a whole bag of clothes every week. But that was kind of unusual, and they were rich because their parents owned like an extermination company or something. In the late 90s and early aughts, fast fashion began to grow and grow. And the 2008 financial crisis gave it the boost it needed because clothes got cheaper and cheaper. The rise of the internet and e-commerce meant that people wanted trends faster and faster, and brands needed to launch as much stuff as possible in order to keep the customers interested. Brick and mortar stores were super afraid of losing business to the internet, so they stuffed more and more product into their spaces and created more and more hot deals. And that's kind of where we are now. So I know that you two have a story from the 1700s to tell me.
Yeah, so this is
Well, it kind of covers a long time period. But the other night we were chatting about the name Paisley, like for humans.
I guess potentially for animals as well, but we were mainly talking about it for humans. And so before we launch into this too, this whole history lesson, I think it's important to know that Maggie's background, well, do you want to talk about your background for yourself?
I went to school for textiles. Well, it was crafts. So
craft department.
You know, glass, wood, metal, and fibers. And so a lot of what we did was focus on the history of fibers in a really not great way. One of the things they would have us do a lot was go to the library and find like a book on like Guatemala or like, you know, textiles from like
Ancient
the Middle East or whatever. And then like pick a motif and then like manipulate it to make a new pattern out of it, which
you could call it inspiration, you could call it theft, I suppose, depending on how far you take it, you know. And so, I mean, that was specifically kind of the backbone of what they taught in terms of
like design. So I had a teacher in another class, like unrelated to crafts, who was kind of like, listen, I know they tell you to do that, but that's not okay.
Yeah, it is definitely not okay.
You say his words were basically, you can't understand what it's like to have your culture taken. And
yeah, well, and he said, like, you can't have a true understanding of what that means to that culture.
Right.
Especially because a lot of motifs or a lot of patterns, a lot of prints, those sort of things, you know, are ancient or at least long-standing, and they usually have some sort of cultural significance or religious significance. And so even when you look, I know that you had touched on the whole like tribal print trend through the history of, you know, the history of fashion, different prints have come in and out. And so you see things like quote unquote tribal or African prints, which are obviously manipulated by some sort of designer. Something like a Thunderbird motif stolen from indigenous people. You see all sorts of these patterns that definitely the person who's making them is probably, as we've learned from listening to many designers, on some sort of time crunch or told to do it regardless. But ultimately, it's kind of taking a motif and manipulating it into a print. And so as we're talking about Paisley and kind of like what is the history of Paisley, because ultimately every conversation we have turns into some sort of deep dive on.
Well, as a person's name, we said, what does Paisley mean? And so we looked it up, and it means, well, according to whatever the first thing I pulled up was, it church. Which
really?
We were like, what?
Yeah, okay. It's weird. But then, I mean, so, you know, if you have like an understanding that language morphs over time, and so Paisley actually comes from two different places, but the name Paisley would be derived from Scottish Gaelic. And so it basically means church or wood, like a wooded area or a pasture, which actually makes sense in the context of more ancient people, or even more in Western history, worship was tied into like the land. And if you're wondering what Scotland has to do with anything, or did you say Scotland? You just said Gaelic. Yeah, it's a little Scottish Gaelic. Yeah.
So Paisley is a town in Scotland.
Okay. Had no idea.
And I had originally understood that Paisley was more of an Indian design.
Yeah,
but
me too. Me too.
Okay, well, so apparently it is, but it was kind of taken. Would you cover this part?
Sure. Okay. So basically, we're about to take you on a journey here where we call out buffalo plaid. That's our end result here. It's all started with us talking about Paisley, because Paisley was a town in Scotland that had a different variation on the spelling that we know today, because it would have been Scottish Gaelic. But basically, it started as an abbey and became a town. It was actually like a really important part of the world during the Industrial Revolution. It became the center for handloom weaving of linen. So they also produced thread as well. So they kind of, you know, the Industrial Revolution could kind of, like what you were just touching on with sewing machines, that was the start of mechanization of a lot of processes that hadn't previously been mechanized. And so they were a really hot center for that in the Western world.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to find the exact tie-in with the print Paisley in Scotland, other than Maggie is going to read something that we found interesting. It sums it up better than we could. It's from the Paisley Foundation, I believe.
So the Paisley pattern can be traced back to the Indo-European cultures of 2,000 and more years ago. In Britain, the pattern is represented in Celtic art, which died out in Europe under the influence of the Roman Empire. However, in India, the motif continued to flourish in many different art forms. It was first used on shawls and cashmere, and examples of this work were brought back to Britain by the East India Company in the mid-18th century. So, shawls quickly became the vogue, but they were in short supply and enormously expensive. As a result, they were imitated by British textile manufacturers who sold them for a tenth of the price. The Indian motif itself was reinterpreted and developed to conform to European taste. The impact was dramatic. Imitation Indian shawls were so popular that the weaving centers in Edinburgh, Norwich, and Paisley were swamped with orders. For 70 years, the patterned shawls remained fashionable, and the term Paisley became renowned throughout the world.
And so they essentially, perhaps there was some tie-in with early Celtic culture, but the Paisley that they were producing in their mills was a woven textile that used the Paisley motif that we see. You can go buy a Paisley tunic at H&M right now in 15 different colors. So the Paisley that we know kind of got appropriated by the Paisley of Scotland. And I think when we were digging into this just randomly, it was interesting to see that was kind of one of the first instances I've ever heard of for fast fashion. So, they basically brought this item over that was so highly coveted, and they couldn't produce it fast enough. So they made a cheaper version for a tenth of the price.
And then they named it after themselves.
Yep.
Classic.
Yep.
Totally classic. So fast fashion, it's always been a part of being a human, I guess.
Oh yeah. And so in Paisley, because it was such an important part of the Industrial Revolution, it's important to note that in 1820, there was a radical uprising of the mill workers, which were the highly skilled weavers that were largely women and children. So, on theme as well, who had immigrated from the Highlands because of this need for these Paisley shawls. I think the Queen had worn one and everyone went crazy for it, and they needed as many Paisley shawls as they could get. So they had women and children come, and they became the skilled workers. But with the death of the trend of the shawls, so yes, it was a 70-year trend, but even back then, trends died a horrible, quick death. So with the death of the trend of shawls, it killed the textile industry in Paisley, which then collapsed. And there was a huge political uprising, and the end result of that was that the mill owners retained political control of the town of Paisley. So it's...
Well, that's not very inspiring.
I know, it's like, we're really just repeating the same thing, the same themes over and over.
So this made us ask, what else has been stolen? And I said, well, what about plaid?
Yeah, we're talking about Scotland. Oh, well, where does plaid come from? So diving into the Scottish textile history brought up the fact that it was a very surprising fact to us, considering her husband and my partner are
both Scottish descent.
They're both of Scottish descent.
Okay.
And occasionally we'll go to these Scottish festivals where you see tartans, and everyone has, if you have any familiarity with people of Scottish or Irish descent, they have a lot of pride in their family plaid, or the plaid is different than a tartan, but basically they're family tartan. And so guess what? Scottish tartans are not an ancient tradition among clans, as implied. As we thought.
Oh my God, this goes so deep.
Right. So basically they are what is called an invented tradition. This is a new term to us, but
what?
I think that term, when you hear it, is like, oh, welcome to America.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a burn.
Yeah,
it's such a burn.
And so originally tartans, it's not a print. So plaid wasn't a print. It was the tartans were woven, and the colors were woven together to create what we know as like a plaid print now. And they originated around the 16th century, as weavers would utilize local plants to create different colored plaid. So they would dye the actual fibers, the colors, and weave them together, which would create the tartan, or what we know as a plaid. Tartans didn't become uniform and affiliated with certain clans or family names until the late 1700s or the early 1800s. So tartan.
Really?
Yeah. So tartan,
that's like recent, you know?
You're only going back a few generations there. That blew my mind because I guess it's, you know, we're nerds. We like to look into everything, but that one really went over my head because it does, with the Highland dress, look as if it is some sort of ancient tradition. But it's not. So, you know, tartans are actually younger than the United States of America. So,
well, tartan goes back farther, but having a tartan specific to your clan
or your family
would be
family name.
Your family name would be relatively new.
And so, of course, you know, if you want to know the whole history, because why wouldn't we do that? So tartan is essentially the dress of the Highland rebels, so in Scotland, and it was banned from 1746 to 1782. So what had happened with that is that this man named Bonnie Prince Charles, he came to Scotland. He was actually Roman, so he wasn't Scottish, but he came to Scotland to create a Scottish army to invade England and usurp the Protestant king to restore Catholic rule. So he basically came from Rome to Scotland to put together an army of people who had nothing to do with any of, you know, his mission, to fight to restore Catholic rule to Britain. So not even necessarily their, the area that they were in. And what he did is he used tartan to blend in with the locals. So to kind of cover up the fact that he was Roman, just like, you know,
right.
Locals only, I guess. So he basically came to trick the Highland people into building an army for him to usurp the British king so Catholics could rule the Protestants. So just this bullshit, fucked up story where this man came on his mission from God, you know, to restore whatever order he deemed appropriate for the people. So basically there were, you know, for years, these bloody battles where those armies that he had put together fought all wearing the Highland dress. So they wore those tartans. And originally what they had worn were a mix of tartans. So like back in history, depending on the region that you came from, the colors would vary on your tartan. But in battle, they would have worn different piece on the top and different color on the bottom kind of thing. So there was no loyalty to any specific pattern. When he left defeated after many bloody battles, tartan was banned. So that was the big ban that they had. And it basically retained a cult status during those years, and Scottish families decided they wanted their own differentiated tartan. So it was kind of like a underground cool, like, oh, let's get these tartans kind of divvied up. And also I think what was interesting too, just as, you know, you think about the history of it. So it was these woven fabrics, especially that were native to these specific regions. And when it became a thing for the differentiated tartans for families or clans, they made those tartans on machines. So it switched entirely from this beautiful handcrafted item where the colors were woven into a pattern into basically a machine made what we call plaid today, which was actually also taken from Scottish Gaelic. So it's really younger than the United States of America. It's really this invented tradition. And guess what one of the major tartans was, the invented tradition tartans?
I don't know.
Buffalo plaid.
Ah, classic.
Oh, yeah. So the way that we all view buffalo plaid now, it's like, oh, you're going to get your family photos taken.
Like it's all American.
You go to Target and you buy like a matching red and black. So basically, if anyone isn't familiar with buffalo plaid, it is that type of plaid that is a large block of red and black.
Well, it can be
white,
other colors, but where it came from, it would have been red and black.
It was actually the tartan of Rob Roy McGregor. So I don't know if anyone remembers like that 90s movie.
Isn't there a drink called a Rob Roy?
Yes. There's also a cocktail called a Rob Roy.
Yeah.
He is the Scottish Robin Hood.
So like he was this huge folklore legend. I think in some circles he's bigger than maybe in our circle, but he's a big folklore legend. He was essentially supposedly their Robin Hood.
Well, I mean, he has his own drink, you know?
Yeah, so he was pretty important.
Pretty important to history.
So a descendant of his, whose name was Jock McCluskey.
Or they called him Big Jock. Big Jock.
Oh, man, I don't like this at all.
Yeah, already you can already tell, right? It's
yeah,
going
old Big Jock.
Big Jock. And so, I mean, he basically lived up to his name, which would be way cooler if he was like a rapper or something.
Yeah.
But he had come over as a colonizer from Scotland to Canada. So his family came to Canada. He was like a very direct descendant from Rob Roy, and their family tartan was buffalo plaid. Let's see, I wrote down some notes on here and how he was described, because if when you read history, you have to always look at the subcontext and kind of understand what they're really saying. So Big Jock was a figure described as feared and revered and a sometimes lawman.
Oh, sometimes.
Yeah. So, I mean, he's a nightmare from hell, basically. So he was ironically a part of the illegal and unethical seizure. Let me say that again. He was ironically a part of the illegal and unethical seizure and destruction of native lands. So he was originally a buffalo hunter. And if anyone is familiar with like the huge instance of buffalo genocide in North America, that alone should be enough to hate him. Buffalo were hunted nearly into extinction, and from millions of buffalo down to about 300, I believe, before I think it was Yellowstone. Yeah, Yellowstone kind of like brought them back. But I think even today there's only
200,000.
Oh, okay. She knows how many buffalo there are. Maggie knows every buffalo.
Really concerned.
She knows all the buffalo. But I mean, that alone is super fucked up. And so that was what he had originally come here as. And so what he ended up becoming was sort of like a middleman between the native people, and specifically the Sioux and the Cheyenne people, and like the white colonizers. So the people that came and decided to, because of, another mission from God, manifest destiny, decided to take over the land. He kind of negotiated between the tribes and the colonizers. And the thing that he used that was a major trade tool and apparently a huge hit, not surprising because it's still a big hit today.
Buffalo plaid.
Bigger than ever.
Everyone's always loved a damn buffalo plaid, that's for sure. So basically he used his family tartan, buffalo plaid, in the form of wool blankets. And I mean, we all know how that didn't fare well here, but with blankets, and he traded them for buffalo pelts. And so we have this from the Tartan's Authority. In our research, we found this description of his, I feel like this kind of sums up without any subcontext. It's just right all there for you. According to McCluskey's great nephew, Gregor McCluskey, Sioux and Cheyenne warriors were in awe of its color. None had seen such a deep, rich red. They believed its intensely rich hue of red to be a sorcerer's hex, a dye distilled from the spirit, blood, and ghostly souls of McCluskey's prey and enemies. A belief that Big Jock did little to correct. Worn in battle and draped across their war ponies, it was prized as a good luck talisman and revered as a spirit guardian that would deliver immortality even in the face of death itself. So basically he lied to them and let them think that the tartan was dyed with blood, with human blood.
Of course he did.
Yeah, so, I mean,
old Big Jock.
Big Jock is buffalo plaid.
Then comes Woolrich.
Yeah, so then you think the appropriation is over. You think in this line of weird appropriation that you're done. But no, if you look, you want to talk about Woolrich?
Well, Woolrich claims to be the first purveyor of buffalo plaid, and I believe it's trademarked, yeah.
So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
According to them, they first invented it in the 1850s.
We've got this faux mythology about the inventor owning a herd of buffalo. That's how they came up with the name. They didn't even try hard to come up with it. They said, the designer owns a buffalo, so that's why he named it that.
Stop.
And then they basically claimed it as their own, and now we see it, we saw it on, back then, it was, Paul Bunyan's shirt and Tom Mix in the Western movies, and
now it's on every single thing possible.
I don't think you can hold an axe if you're not wearing buffalo plaid. I think.
It's also on like dog beds.
Yep.
And I feel like it's a big part of like Christmas pajamas for the whole family and slippers, wrapping paper.
You even get like a cake that's buffalo plaid or something.
Oh, I'm sure.
Wow. Yeah. It definitely had a really huge moment for a couple of years there where it was cool. It was that like post-metal era when dudes were all turning into lumberjacks, and now it's like so mass that I think it's lost its meaning. I mean, obviously it had lost its meaning anyway, because definitely no one knew this story until now.
No, and it's one of those things where, anything you look into can have like everything has a historical context down to the smallest minute things, but that one's almost on the surface. And if you actually read a lot of those things, you just kind of know. Now we know how unethical a lot of like the twist and turn in fashion take. And that's all through, you're talking about these tartans then that were machine made, and this is post-industrial revolution. So the sweatshops have begun. Like this is over the sweatshops over in Europe. They couldn't produce enough of these tartans. They still can't produce enough of these tartans. No,
not for all the dog beds. No, all the dogs need beds.
They need beds. Oh yeah, you need to pick it up at Home Goods and then maybe get a buffalo plaid frame. I don't know.
I have a buffalo
definitely some throw pillows.
Oh no, Maggie has a buffalo plaid dog bed. She got called.
I don't know where it came from, but it's in my basement.
So, just all these things are so insidious. They just creep up on you like that.
Yeah, it's true. I'm gonna like dig through my house after this is over and see where our hidden family buffalo plaid is. But I think the recurring theme, which we haven't done an episode about this because it's a lot to unpack and it's going to take a lot of research for me, is that fashion, both fast fashion and what we think of as like the more high-end fashion, both have their roots in colonization, right? It's all about colonizing countries and stealing their culture and art, amongst other things. And these are just two really good examples. I mean, I think that people think of buffalo plaid as this like all-American print.
Oh, yeah.
For sure.
Oh, yeah. Totally.
For sure. So, sorry for all the buffalo plaid aficionados out there.
Sorry to all the Scottish people, because I think both of our partners were very displeased with this information as well.
Yeah, they weren't happy.
Sorry, Dustin and Brian.
Well, so that brings us to so fashion is shitty. We've talked about this a lot. What is fast fashion? Because we talk about it all the time, like I said, and we've never really spelled it out. Well, according to the dictionary, I always loved when in like middle school when someone would give a report and they would start with like Webster's defines fashion as, the description. Anyway, so according to the dictionary, fast fashion is inexpensive clothing produced rapidly by mass market retailers in response to the latest trends. There's a few things there that I'm like, yes, 100% true. I think produced rapidly, mass market retailers, latest trends, those are three like things we should hold on to here. Fashion revolution, which is like totally, pushing it back against fast fashion in every way right now. And that's their entire mission, says it's that the globalized market for fashion manufacturing has facilitated a fast fashion phenomenon, which is cheap clothing with quick turnover that encourages repurchasing. And that whole quick turnover and repurchasing concept, we're going to talk about a lot today because we all have experience with that in a lot of different ways.
Oh, yeah.
I think that sometimes throwing cheap in there or inexpensive can be a red herring. Like some of it is 100% cheap, Forever 21, H&M, Shein, but not all of it is. And I think it tricks customers into believing that something is fast fashion, into not believing that something is fast fashion when it is. Like Banana Republic is fast fashion, It's kind of expensive, right? I mean, you don't put it in the same price point as Forever 21, and they're totally different customers, but it's mass produced very quickly, high margin. The idea is that you're going to buy more and more of it. So I mean, I've never actually bought anything at Banana Republic in my whole life, I have to be honest, but I know what they have. I know people who've worked there, and I know the kind of profit they make off of everything they sell. My problem with like that idea of the retail price, like which retail price once again is like what the customer pays. It has very little to do with whether or not the brand is fast fashion, especially now and in the past few years, because so much stuff is sold at a discount, like promos, clearance events, that a much higher margin is baked in up front. So the product was still cheap to make, but it might have a higher price point because the brand is anticipating that they will rarely sell it at full price. Now, I don't know. Do they do like Black Friday sales at H&M?
Oh, yes.
Do they like doorbustery kind of stuff? Or
Okay. So, I mean, I started working there in 2007, which was kind of when it was around the time when they were still a little bit more obscure in America. They had already been around for a long time in European countries, but basically they came into America with like this grand plan to blow everyone out of the water with Black Friday.
Great.
Yeah, I used to do a lot of store openings all over the country, as well as worked in pretty much every store in Michigan at the time. And whenever we either opened a store or we had Black Friday, we would do this thing where we had scratch off tickets, like literally like lottery tickets. And the first, 100 people, 50 people, depending on the market, sometimes I think 150, 200 people in line would get a scratch off ticket. And so everyone would get at least, I think it was $10 off, but there were they gave out such a ridiculous amount of tickets that were $500 tickets, $200 tickets. So all of these people would wait in line, and our first couple hours of Black Friday would be ringing up. Just, we had all these deals. We would have like the doorbusters. I think they got on doorbusters a little bit later, but we had just ridiculous amounts of deals that we would have to merchandise to the front of the store, the front of the department. And people would come in and just grab armfuls of these deals, bringing them to the counter, and we would spend hours ringing them up, just these long lines. And then at the end, scan their little lottery ticket, and it's a $0 sale. Or like they owe $4 or something like that. So they really came into America with
guns blazing, man.
Yeah, with that Black Friday taste in their mouth, I guess.
but when you're the customer, you're like, wow, look at me. I just got all this stuff for free. I really, stuck it to the man here at H&M. But the reality is that like those deals are planned into their sales plan. So they know they're going to sell to certain people are going to come in and get $500 worth of stuff for free. And you know what? They baked that in from the very beginning by taking a higher markup in the first place. So basically, when you get that $500 worth of free clothing, which at H&M must like require like a wheelbarrow to take it out.
I
can't even imagine.
These giant bags that we had, like our biggest bag, it would just be people leaving with armloads. And, while maybe at the level, like you were on the other side, basically, I was always in a store. And so like at the store level, well, yes, the company understands that they've like baked that discount into the price. On a store level, as a manager, we still had to hit these ridiculous sales numbers, regardless of the fact that we were essentially handing out free clothing. And so on the lowest level, we're already suffering. We're giving away all this stuff for free, but we're also, as a manager, as I got higher up, looking at, these items leaving the store and just thinking, my people are being worked to death right now. They're all miserable, but I am still about to be cussed out on this, on this district call for not hitting these numbers. We would, track to the hour, sales per hour. And so Black Friday, you're back there checking out your sales on the computer and just trying to get, anyone to buy all this bullshit that they don't need, so that you're not going to get in trouble for your sales per hour, basically. Because at the lowest store level, that's, I feel like everyone gets, the ire of the upper, their bosses. But on a store level, it's just like you see every bit of the madness that is fast fashion, especially on those days.
Oh, no, totally. The store that I worked in, we opened at midnight on Black Friday. And it was like, I want to say it was like additional 50% off markdowns.
Uh-huh.
And then there'd be some other stuff, but that was like the big thing. And so we would, I was a store merchandiser for like a week in advance, we would be just like hanging up rolling racks and rolling racks and rolling racks of sale stuff and like storing it in the back. And then, I would come in at like 10 p.m. on Thanksgiving to roll it all out and set it up and sign it. And people would wait in line outside. And the people who came at midnight on Black Friday shopping were like kind of the worst people ever. It was so stressful. Everybody was really angry, being like really rude to everyone who worked there. There were like 9,000 spilled Frappuccinos everywhere, and like just everybody being mad that they have to wait in line, that we can't find their size. I'm like, well, we kind of have like 100 people shopping in here right now. We can't find your size. Like, just is what it is. And I remember our district manager calling us like every hour to be like, where are you? Where are you now? How about now? How about now? What are you going to do? And it's kind of like, I don't know what to do. Do you want me to send someone downtown and have them like start driving people up here? Like, what do you want us to do?
Well, that is like what you have going on. So it's not as if, like you're saying, all the people that show, especially, I think it's died out, but all of the people that would show up for those early openings, like I've done the midnight openings or done even like the night before openings, those sort of things. Those shoppers have no interest in treating anyone with respect. It's almost like that brief period of time, probably in like 2015, maybe a little bit earlier, where everyone was really into sharing videos of like fights on Black Friday. And,
yeah, that stuff is real.
Yeah. And so while, most of those videos may have been Walmart over some sort of cheap toaster oven, we did this, one of the stores I worked at, we did have this huge fist fight between this group of girls, like teenage girls, where I don't think they were even fighting over the clothing. They were fighting over, I believe there was some sort of boy involved, but it was in the midst of all this crazy Black Friday, shopping and all these people grabbing all these deals that are $5, the doorbusters, and they're just punching each other. And we have all these empty fixtures because everything's been bought because it's all $5. Everyone's grabbed it. And so they're just like fist fighting in the midst of all of these empty fixtures, which if you work in retail, they can be very dangerous. Everyone's gotten like a bruised butt or a black eye or something from a spigot that hits you in the face. They're just punching each other into these stands that have these pointy pieces on them. And it's like,
oh my God,
that sort of thing. And you're dealing with these people who are trying to get all these deals and they're mad that you're sold out. They're mad that this coupon can't be used, on Black Friday for these deals that are already marked from $35 to $5. So you've got all of this going on. And then you get a phone call from a district team member saying, well, you're not really, you're down about 20% to last year. And you're like, I have to go. I have to call the police or something.
Yeah. And it's like you spend easily a month preparing for this one day. Like you have to, the store manager is like reworking the schedule, like has to submit the schedule draft to the district manager to make sure the coverage is right. And
plan all the food and all the minute breaks and you got to make
the break schedule,
in different departments, all that kind of stuff. And actually in reality, you're doing that sort of stuff maybe a month out, but a month out now, well, I haven't been in fast fashion for a few years, but even, 5 years ago when I was a store manager, your Black Friday starts now in October.
Oh, 100%. I mean, in general, the sales start in October now too. Yeah. So it's spread out.
It's together.
Right. And so in order to make up for all these fake deals that we're getting, the stuff has to be cheaper to make, but be priced at the same point. So that's why it's a little hard to judge if something's fast fashion by how much it cost you. And like this culture of deals is so out of control. Like I always think of Kohl's as like the sketchiest place you could ever shop. And I can assure you all the clothes at Kohl's are fast fashion.
Yes.
I mean, they have like, everything is always like 50% off the regular price anyway. And then they have like Kohl's Cash and random other sales and promos. And I've seen them give out scratch tickets, and basically everything is on sale in one way or another all the time, except for like the one thing that you had to go there to get, like a blender,
Yeah. Or just like a black pair of pants.
Yeah. Like, forget it. That's always full price. But like these Vera Wang light gray knee-high faux leather boots are definitely 50% off,
Yeah.
It's like so silly. So, and there are all these other discounts that we take for granted that retailers like now in the era of like online shopping have to take into account too. So once again, this drives the costs down, but pushes the retail prices up. So like when you sign up for someone's email list and you get that discount code, which everyone does, right?
Yeah, they do it in line all the time too.
Yeah, for sure.
You're one of the, if there's anyone here still shopping fast fashion, just sign up for the email before you get in the line, please.
Oh, yeah. And for like, please, for the love of God, do not ever pay full price for anything because it's not worth it. The real cost of making that garment is probably about 20% of what you're paying for it.
Yeah.
So other discounts are these internet coupon codes from places like Retail Me Not and like cashback coupon offers with Rakuten and Honey. And in those situations, I urge you to use them, by the way, because you can, if you're going to buy fast fashion, get a deal. The retailer pays these websites for this partnership. And then also, so they're losing money there and then they lose money to you with the discount. So they also have to push up retail prices to like cover that. We would literally have meetings in places I worked where like, okay, well, the Retail Me Not partnership is finally going live this week. Like, hopefully this is going to drive a bunch of sales. And I don't know if it really ever did, but that's why those sites exist. And that's how they make money. It's not just some avid deal hunter who's like doing a good deed for the world.
No, it's definitely.
It's like a huge scheme.
Yeah, we even had a problem. H&M was not an early adopter of Retail Me Not. However, we would get, if you look at something like Retail Me Not, it looks like a fake website. Like it looks like a weird spammy thing. And so we would.
It does. It's terrible.
Yeah, I think it was we battled them for, I think, a year, maybe almost 2 years, where people would bring in fake Retail Me Not coupons. And eventually, we would always say, they'd say, don't honor them. We don't do that. And then all of a sudden one day, oh, okay, we take Retail Me Not now. And it was,
of course,
it was the weirdest. We're like, wait, is that even a real website?
I know. When I first heard about it, I thought it was like a weird, like extreme couponer thing that someone was just some like, Midwestern mom was running out of her garage or something. And so it was really shocking to me. I think we may have done some deals with them at ModCloth. And I was like, wait, this is a real business?
Oh my God, yeah.
Wow, I had no idea. It doesn't look like it. No, they're doing a really good job. Another thing that like pushes our prices up and the cost down is free shipping, which we've talked about before. Like someone has to pay for that. UPS isn't like, no, it's cool. I'll just do it for free. And then another one that I think that sometimes people forget about is employee discounts and like friends and family offers. Now, I worked for a pretty big corporation that had several fast fashion brands under its umbrella. And they would have these like employee appreciation times when you could get an extra discount with your discount. And these things would literally be planned around like pay periods to make sure everyone just got paid when it started. And when sales were not meeting expectation, like maybe they're hitting the end of the quarter and we weren't hitting our numbers, they would just throw in an extra employee appreciation event just to boost that. Like that's how much employee stuff is being sold.
Oh yeah, and I believe it. I mean, if you look at any retailer, whether it's fast fashion or going under the guise of being something higher, they get you to buy into the whole branding, the lifestyle. They want you to look like you work there. Whether or not you have to is dependent on the company, but generally people start to just you're there all the time. You live your life. If you work in retail, you live your life in a damn mall, or you're in the store.
Most of the years that you worked at H&M, I had a card that I had to carry in my wallet, and I would get 20% off. It wasn't all the time, but it would be like for 6 months or something.
But it is genius to tap into the market of your family members, your friends. It's like it gets those people to almost feel like they're supporting you in some way, which is definitely not the case. But I think they kind of work it in there with, friends and family discount, that sort of thing.
Right. And I reached a point, when I was like a store merchandiser where I would be very concerned about us meeting our sales plan because I wasn't going to get a bonus or maybe a promotion or, a raise.
Or you just even have to deal with listening to any of the like feedback on your job.
Totally. Getting lectured, like having to like have a meeting about my performance because we hadn't met our sales target. And so I would literally be on Facebook like, hey, we're having a big sale. Please come, please come. Like it is interesting. And when you're in when you're working in a store, the amount of clothes you end up buying is insane. And when I look back at like how fast fashion moved into my life and I became suddenly someone who bought clothes all the time, it was definitely started when I was working in a store.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely. Because it was just there all the time.
You feel frantic because, now we have sale and we get a discount on sale. So I've got to,
Yeah. Yeah. And what I have is out of style now already, even though it just came in a month ago, or it's already fallen apart.
That's what I was going to say.
I've been wearing it to work.
If you work in fast fashion and you wear the clothing, you have to buy the clothing all the time because it doesn't withstand working in fast fashion.
Like including while you're working, something you're wearing might fall apart.
Yeah, I remember when my store manager, when I was a visual merchandiser, I had to run into the fitting room because the button and the zipper had busted on a pair of pants that I wore. And I was like, can you decensor them, bring them to me, and I will pay you when I walk out because I am about to expose my ass to the whole store.
Totally. I mean, I remember once being in the office, the manager's office, and the store manager stapling my dress back together.
Oh, yeah.
So I can make it through the rest of the day. Lots of staple repairs.
Yeah, I had a store manager. She would always she was really tiny and the pants were too big. So she would always have me staple the pants down so that they fit her.
Oh my gosh. Staples. There you go, guys. Repair on the go. If you haven't had to repair your clothes with a stapler, you haven't lived life yet.
Oh, yeah. And the seamstress sitting next to me is just cringing inside right now.
I know. It makes more problems for sure. So another discount is just that, like, I haven't worked anywhere that has this, but I see it a lot, is like when you sign up for this credit card and you get 20% off.
Yeah.
It's like those things are everywhere right now. And like, once again, they have to pay for that. They pay for that by raising retails, reducing costs. I mean, it's like, why do I want an Ulta credit card?
No.
Literally, how is that useful to me?
No, it's like another predatory credit scam.
Yeah. They're all scams. So, okay, so we're already saying, like, you can't really tell if it's fast fashion by price. I hope that everybody is getting that now. So that said, there are lots of really clear identifying attributes of fast fashion. So one of these, and I know, Katie, you're going to like feel this one too, because I know where you worked, are new styles coming every week or even every day. Because I worked in a store where we received a shipment of new stuff 5 days a week.
Oh, yeah.
Like, a truck pulled up and we all had to go outside and carry boxes in. It would be like 20, 40, 50, 100 boxes of new product.
Oh, yeah.
Monday through Friday.
Yeah, we would get, I worked in smaller volume stores compared to bigger cities, but, we'd get 150 to like 200 totes that we would have to process. We'd get it 3 times a week. And it's, you have a whole team pulling this clothing out of the totes, putting it on the table, and you have these processes to try and meet these efficiency standards. It's just third amount of clothing. Oh, yeah. Maggie also.
Totally.
Well, I worked at Forever 21 for.
So how many boxes were you guys getting?
On the time of year, but it could be anywhere from like some days it would be like 10 boxes up to like 150. And during holiday, we got boxes 7 days a week.
Oh,
it got to the point where we had so many boxes in our back room, which was very small, that they were,
which was also your break room,
which was also our break room and where our bathroom was.
Great.
And they were piled up, and we had, for some reason, we had like an excessive amount of pregnant sales associates. They could not get in the back room
to the bathroom
because the doorway was narrowed by all these boxes piled up. So they had to go out into the mall to use the bathroom.
Oh my God, stop. That is crazy. I mean, so for me, and I don't know if the two of you had this experience as well. Like, so I worked like in stores in retail, I would say about like 5 years cumulatively. And I noticed this difference where like in the beginning, it felt like we generally had enough payroll, as in like enough people working to get that shipment out on the floor. But with each passing year, our payroll was pulled back more and more. And it reached this point where like when I was a store merchandiser, where we would have just 100 boxes of shipment and receiving at all times, that we could never stay on top of it. And I don't know if you guys had to do this, but we would have to put those security tags on it too, which would slow everything down. So you have to like take the clothes out of the box, take off all the poly bags. Sometimes they'd be on plastic hangers. Sometimes like if it was like Levi's or something, there would be vendor tags on there that we had to cut off because we weren't allowed to have any other branded tags on our stuff. And then we'd have to put on all the security tags, and then it would go to the fitting rooms and someone would either hang it or fold it. And it was just like, I would stay late for 4, 5, 6 hours every night just to tag this product, like off the clock, you know, because I was salaried. So it was like, if it didn't get out, I was going to hear about it. And it was like so stressful. Every time that truck pulled up, we would be like, please let it only be 10 boxes today and not 100.
Oh yeah. We had, I mean, okay. So one of my big projects that I took on as a store manager was essentially this logistics project. We were one of the first 20 stores in the country to adopt this new way of working. And they had the most specific to, I would say, the second ways of processing stock, the ways of processing like a order at the cash point, the way that the fitting room worked. Everything was so specific. You had to follow these very rigid rules. And even within that, you know, we would get our numbers ahead of time for our truck, and we would make these plans that were to the minute, color coded to the like every person was working in a different, you know, we knew what department this was. They'd have all the kids done. They'd have the men's done. If there's anyone from H&M listening to this, they're probably like having a slight panic attack thinking about it right now. But, it was such a, I mean, they put so much money into this program, and it was efficient, but at the same time, one little wrench thrown into the system could throw the whole thing off. And so I think that's like when you're working at the pace of fast fashion, one little thing can throw off on a store level how things go. So like we had a problem. This was at the end of my career there, and it kind of, I have nightmares about it still. We had this period of time where we ran out of hangers in the US.
Oh my God. Okay. I've had this experience too.
That's, I mean, especially when so we were never allowed to leave the stock room with, we called it rollover. If we had it, we would have to report it. And it was just, you know, you never wanted to be the store manager or the department manager or the supervisor, any of these roles. You never wanted to be the one that had to call and say, you know, we have 20 totes of rollover. But there was a period of time, it was months, where we just had no hangers. And so you have to sell, you know, we would save the hangers. You have to sell the items to get the hangers, take the hangers back, reuse them. And so, you know, if your sales are down and there are no hangers being shipped to anyone, you have nowhere to put these clothes. And so we would, you know, every table, they would call us and say, just do all folds on the table, just fold everything. It was just, it got comical. At some point, I mean, even in my exit interview, I talked a lot about it because the way that you were treated on a store level was as if you were doing something so heinous by having all this merchandise in the back, because you know that merchandise is on a timer. The second you open that box, if you don't sell that as fast as possible, no one wants it in 3 months. And so,
I mean, that's, I would say even in 30 days, like that. I mean, I think that's really telling.
Depending on the department. Yeah. So it's, you know, we always said things have an expiration date. And so it was like the worst offense to have things back there in that stock room. And, you know, dealing with something like, I mean, the stress levels across the whole district when that hanger shortage were going on were ridiculous. And looking back on it, I can laugh because, you know, we didn't have hangers. That's so stupid. But at the time I was staying after work for hours. I was dissociating at work. I would lose time. I would get home and just be like, you know, I have to go to bed right now because I can't think about these stupid rollover totes in the back for one more minute.
Yeah, because it's just the speed that this product is coming. And God forbid, which I know this has been a major issue at H&M for the past few years, God forbid the sales plan is extremely unachievable, because the amount of product you're going to end up with just backing up is insane. E-com retailers kind of have a similar situation where they launch new product at least once a week, others every day. When I worked at ModCloth, we launched product every day. I want to say at noon. Our customer expected it, that we would launch new stuff every single day. And so we ended up with a lot of stuff, you know. Like, and if it's a warehouse, it's more like figurative stuff because you can't see it. You don't have to make it into a concept on the floor. You know, the customer is not going to see it. So you can kind of expand as much as you want. But when you start translating all those new styles to the store, which is what happens at places like H&M or Forever 21. I mean, the amount of styles I see in a Forever 21 store never cease to blow my mind. Like, I can't even believe it. I mean, Zara is pretty similar that way too. There's just so much stuff in there. You know, I would ask like yourself, if you go into a store and they have, I don't know, 1,000 different items in there, thousands even, it's definitely fast fashion, no matter what the price tickets say. You know, like go into a boutique. Do they have 1,000 different things for sale in there? No. Right.
And then the trends. I mean, Maggie would always laugh about like the trends that they had at Forever 21. Like, you want to?
Well, they have. I mean, there is no organization in the store other than that. Every 6 weeks, they send down this like reset where everybody has to stay overnight and reset the entire store, reorganize it. But it wasn't organized to begin with because, I mean, there's no plan to get everything processed. It's just like whatever anyone can get out of a box while they are also doing all of their other tasks is what will end up on the floor.
Right.
But so they would have these resets where we had like 10 different girls that the store would have to be organized into. And then it would be all these like crazy trends that had to be like crammed into each section. And like, it didn't necessarily make any sense. But then also the sales associates who worked, you know, like 10 hours a week had to memorize this every 6 weeks to try and get things back into the right place after people try them on in the fitting room.
Doing go backs in a store like that is a nightmare.
I once had 79 racks of go backs that I had to personally do because I was the only visual left in what was that, like a 20,000 square foot store.
The biggest store in the
and I
mall.
was the only one who knew where anything was. I spent an entire week, 5 days, doing go backs.
Lord.
Just putting that.
And I didn't make a dent because people were still trying things
I know.
on.
That's a thing because, you know, especially if you go to a place like Forever 21, you take like 20 things in the fitting room.
And none of them
fit. So then they all go back. And I think
there's no such thing as a garment that fits at Forever 21.
I worked enough retail to be pretty low maintenance when I go shopping, but we all know that person. We've both personally and professionally who thinks that everybody who works in a store is there to make them happy. Like they have that, like the customer is always right disease. That person, I had a friend who I was at Forever 21 with who kept asking people where stuff was and if they could get her another size. And I finally had to like intervene and be like, that doesn't happen here. Okay.
You are not.
They don't
know where it is.
No one knows where
it might.
There's not a person on earth who knows where it is.
Yeah, it might be here. It might not. Go find it on the website and order it. Like seriously,
it may have never even been, you know, sent to the store in that size. So I don't know.
Or it could be in the inventory, but it's sitting in a box in the back room.
Exactly. Or it could have been stolen. And they don't know.
Yeah.
They don't know.
I know one of the phrases that anyone who works in retail, even currently at a place where, like at my current place of employment, we do handwritten receipts and we have a cash register from 1945. People will say, well, can't you just check in the computer? Like everyone in retail hates that fucking phrase. My God. No, I cannot. I can't even tell you if it's on sale, actually.
And I feel like there was this time, like, I don't know, maybe between 2005 and 2010, where like certain retailers had more technology than others. Like it seems like Gap was really able to say like, this is where it is, or do you want me to order it from the website for you? But like where I worked, we didn't have that, and customers would be infuriated. And the only way you could find out if another store had a size was to write down the SKU and then go back to the manager's office and look it up on the computer there. And then you would have to call and be on hold and be like, can you find this in size small, blue? Here's the long SKU, and then be on hold while they looked for it. And then maybe they would have it, and then you'd have to get the customer on the phone so they could do a charge send. It was just like so absurd.
I mean, that's what I do it now all the time. I call a day, but I call to one other store and we have, you know, a certain set of styles. But calling at H&M, if you had a long line of people and someone said, can you call and see if they have this at this 12 Oaks or at Briarwood, or I don't really care, I'll drive to 3 different stores. Can you just call and see if they have it? And you're like, well, let me pause everyone else in line for you so that I can call the store and describe the item And we had, like an order number is what we called it. And so, it's just, people think that point of sale systems are these very sophisticated.
I mean, ours was like black and green. It was like from the 80s,
It's just like, it's not a computer you would ever recognize. People who, are on like a nice MacBook expect us to have the same thing. And it's like, no, this is software that was specifically designed for this company and they didn't want to put a lot of money into it. And so therefore I can look up nothing for you.
Right.
Actually, hopefully it rings up on sale because hopefully I've gone in the back and put in all of the right order numbers to make sure that it shows up on sale in the front.
Right. Thank you to KT and Maggie for being our first ever sister guests, and seriously, like the most prepared guests I've had on the show so far. They will be back in the next episode, like I said, where we'll continue the conversation about fast fashion, and it's real soapy, so get ready. I know this was a weird point to end the conversation for this episode, and it's kind of one of my pet peeves on other podcasts, but I just could not find an easy spot. And it was just such a long session, so I apologize. I really think about this stuff a lot. If you like what you're hearing, please leave a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. And I don't know, maybe you want to consider subscribing. Also, please tell a friend. Personally, I value a podcast recommendation from a friend or a coworker way more than any algorithm suggestions. And thank you to everyone who's been sharing our content, sending nice messages, leaving reviews. Like, you are the best. This is the fuel that keeps me going. I mean, it means so much to me. Do you have an episode suggestion, a burning question? Just want to say hi or share a story of your own, get some advice? You can either email me at clotheshorsepodcast@gmail.com or DM me on Instagram at clotheshorsepodcast. And just a reminder, I'm in the process of moving right now, but in a few weeks, I will be settled in my new home in Lancaster County. And that's when I'm going to get down to work on our directory of ethical, sustainable brands, businesses, vintage sellers, slow fashion designers, you name it. If you want to be involved and included in this directory, please drop me a line. And don't forget, if you love listening to me talk, then you should check out my other podcast, The Department. It's way different than Clotheshorse. I co-host it with Kim, who you might remember from our e-commerce episodes. And we talk about trends, taste, weird stuff from our lives, things we're obsessing about, have obsessed about, everything, you name it. Thanks as always to Dustin Travis White for our music and audio support. He got a very sick haircut from our friend Kelly at Namesake this week. If you see him, tell him he looks great. And if you're in Philly or near it, make an appointment with Kelly. Once again, it's at namesake.studio on Instagram because she's super rad and talented, and her studio is the most stunning salon space I've ever visited. Okay, bye.